From Washington, I'm Efkan Nifty with the Caspian Policy Center. Welcome to our joint event with AIR Center from Baku on U.S.-Azerbaijan relations. This is an interesting time to get together, and I'm glad to have a good lineup of speakers, former ambassadors to Baku, and also experts on Azerbaijan-US relations. And I'm glad to host this event with the AIR Center from Baku. We have the chairman, Farid Shafiev, who's joining us from Baku. And good evening, those who are joining from Baku to our event. At the Caspian Policy Center, we pay a great amount of interest to the relations between Azerbaijan and the United States. We've been producing a lot of reports, analysis, and readings on the region, not only about Azerbaijan, but also greater Caspian region. But Azerbaijan, obviously, as an important country in the region, and Azerbaijan-US relations, the future of the relations is very important. Also, this event comes at a very interesting time where we have a transition in the U.S. Administration from Trump administration to Biden administration. And in the region, we had a very tense 2 months due to the war in Nagorno-Karabakh. Between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And a lot of this have a lot of implications for the future, for policy considerations. Azerbaijan-US relations has a large umbrella and large portfolio of economic, security, and political issues. Obviously, this discussion can help us understand better in this regard. So I'm not going to speak too long here because we have esteemed colleagues who are joining us here. So I'd like to turn the floor to Dr. Shafiev first, and then we'll go to our moderator, Ambassador Richard Hoagland. Dr. Shafiev, floor is yours.
Thank you, and please call me Farid. I would like to thank Caspian Policy Center for organizing it. This is indeed, I think, very timely initiative. We both came together, two centers, to organize. You mentioned that on the American side, there is transition to new administration. On our side, there are two major events happened. The Second Karabakh War, which resulted in the restoration of Azerbaijan's territorial integrity after 30 years of occupation, and also with the new kind of geopolitical situation. There also second event, I would say maybe not that important, but still important. It's the inauguration of the Trans-Adriatic Pipeline. Not inauguration formally, but the operation, I would say, which began in December, and the formal inauguration will be later. And indeed, so many topics now to discuss the future of relationship between the United States and Azerbaijan. And we have really, I thank to all distinguished panelists. We have the mixture, the group of former diplomats, scholars, the experts in the field who are indeed extensively writing about the Azerbaijan, about the South Caucasus and Caspian region. And because of the big interest, we have also interpretation into Azerbaijani language. Just few words I will say in Azerbaijani, and then we'll pass to the panelists. Hürmetli dostlar, bugün bizimki tədbir Azərbaycan dilinə tərcümə olunur və siz mərkəzin YouTube kanalında Azərbaycan dilində bu tədbiri izləyə bilərsiniz. Thank you very much, and again, I appreciate the assistance of CPC in organizing this event.
Ambassador Hoagland, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Efkan, and good day to all of you who are watching wherever you are in the world. Let me repeat what you've already heard. One thing that's important for our listeners in Azerbaijan and Azerbaijani speakers, we do have simultaneous translation. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there is a translation button, interpretation button, and it'll give you the option of German, but there is no option for Azeri. So if you hit German, you'll hear Azeri. Let me say before I go any further that I have a very keen interest in this topic, especially Nagorno-Karabakh, because in 2017, I was the US co-chair for the Minsk group process, along with colleagues from France and Russia. And so I'll be keenly interested to hear what everyone has to say. Let me introduce our speakers today, please, and I will introduce them in the order that they will speak. I'll go through the full introduction and then we'll turn to the first speaker. But among our speakers today is Ambassador retired Robert Sakuda, former ambassador to Azerbaijan. He is the Economy and Energy Program Chair at the Caspian Policy Center. And then, of course, Farid Shafiev, who is the chairman of the Center of Analysis and International Relations in Baku. Then we have Ambassador Richard Morningstar, who's the director and chairman of the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council here in Washington, D.C. Next will be Luke Coffey, the director of the Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies at the Heritage Foundation here in Washington. And Dr. Svante Cornell, the director of the Central Asia Caucasus Institute and Silk Road Studies Program Joint Center. So without further ado, and to make sure we all have time for questions later, let's go to our first speaker. Ambassador Sakuda, you're up. Ambassador, you're on mute.
I'm on mute. I asked, sorry, I should have asked. First of all, thank you very much. And I'm assuming we have about 5 minutes to eat. Okay. Let me try to get through some things, just sort of maybe putting out a basis for further conversation and approaching the U.S.-Azerbaijan relationship from the U.S. side. I mean, I'll leave to Dr. Shafiev to talk sort of how an Azerbaijani would see it. But I think, the first point on this is that any relationship has to be viewed from two sides. Diplomacy is a human relationship, it's human interaction, and it changes over time. And I think as far as looking at the relationship today, it is important to look at the changes and not just try to diagnose the situation, but to try to come up with some possible prescriptions for how to move forward. In terms of the diagnosis, in terms of where we stand in the relationship, from an American point of view, we have looked at the relationship with Azerbaijan as a sort of triangle, a sort of triad of security, energy/economic issues, and good governance, rule of law, human rights issues. Those three intersect. Progress on one reinforces progress on the others. Failure on one side undermines progress on the others. And that's been the sort of the way that we've looked at the relationship for a long time. But over the past, I would say 5 years, there have been a number of evolutions, and in particular, two, for lack of a better term, thunderclaps that have hit the relationship. In terms of the evolution, one is the change in the policies, the ambitions, the actions of key regional, key global players, Russia, China in particular, also Iran. And given Azerbaijan's geographic location, it sits at a key point in the global mosaic in terms of how the United States can deal with Russia, China, and Iran. And so those ambitions of those countries, those changing policies have had an effect. Second, on this sort of, and I think in that front too, we think of China's BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, but that comes to a second evolutionary change. And that is Azerbaijan's development as a regional hub, as an engine for interconnection within Eurasia. And interestingly, from an American point of view, Azerbaijan has financed this development itself. It has not been dependent on China. And that puts it in a different position. But again, because of geography, you can't get to Central Asia, for example, without going through Azerbaijan and Georgia. And this reality, and Luke Coffey's written a lot about this, the sort of Ganja Gap point is key, and something that Azerbaijan has recognized and is developing and is making an important contribution to the stability and the prosperity of Central Asia. Third evolutionary development, I would say, is the Trump administration, which took different tactics towards dealing internationally. It had a much more, I'll be gentle, hands-off approach, but frankly did not engage to the extent it needed to. Even though its own national security strategy talked about 5 key threats, concerns for the United States, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, international crime, terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, drug trafficking, those multilateral groups all being put together. It never really sort of engaged on these things. And that sort of left, I think, Azerbaijan kind of wondering where it stood in the world. Although there were times, for example, with Ambassador Bolton, where there was a stronger engagement. Two thunderclaps. First, COVID. It's affected everything. It's affected in terms of economics, it's affected people's lives, and it's going to continue to affect for a long time. And how we rebuild out of COVID is going to be a key issue. Second thunderclap, the Nagorno-Karabakh war. And that changed the situation in the region dramatically. It also showed the United States not having played the role it might have in terms of helping move forward. Now to jump to diagnosis, what I would suggest is sort of 5 areas where the US and the new incoming administration could maybe make some progress. We should be dealing with Azerbaijan as the US administration, and I would say the Azerbaijani side, recalibrates, rethinks how they talk to each other. One is, again, for the US to engage Azerbaijan on these key changes in the world, key geostrategic changes, Russia, China, Iran, and I would also say Turkey, which is taking on a different role today. Second is working to build peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia. I realize it's very early, emotions are very high, but this is a critical point and something that needs to be worked out. And I think an important point where the United States can make very, very valuable, maybe incomparably valuable contributions. Third, I would say focus on Azerbaijan as a piece of greater Eurasian connectivity. With climate change and so forth, there's going to be a different view on energy than there's been in the past when Ambassador Morningstar and I were dealing with those issues. But Azerbaijan's role in connectivity is crucial, and that's something to work on. I think also building on that cooperation in energy is an important way to build economic connections between the US and Azerbaijan, build a stronger US business commercial relationship. And that can be important both in terms of the pre-September Azerbaijan's development, but also importantly, rebuilding in the Nagorno-Karabakh and the surrounding areas. And finally, and this may be a point that is sort of more controversial in the relationship, look at how to deal better on the governance issues. Fighting corruption is key. Rule of law is key. But the United States and Azerbaijan might do a better a way of talking to each other. They know what the basic issues are. We've all made these talking points. But it's time for the two sides to have, I would say, a more measured, mature, if you want to maybe put it, kind of conversation with each other on moving forward. So with that, let me turn the floor over to my colleagues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador. Next, we will turn to Dr. Shafiev Farid in Baku. And Farid, the floor is now yours, please.
Well, thank you very much. Because of the time constraint, I will focus on the new geopolitical situation and the prospect for the region, prospect for the peace. I would like to note how we came to the situation, to current situation in the South Caucasus, not much going into history, but the problem was that the 30 years, 28 years negotiations yielded no result, and with the current government in Armenia under Pashinyan leadership, which abandoned so-called Madrid principles. That I think that the first serious factor in the Second Karabakh War. Another factor here you mentioned the Lukovi concept about Ganja Gap. It's the July provocation 2020, and now Armenian, even Armenian side, I think it was the ex-president Sarkisyan or Kacharyan, which said that it was the provocation done by the Armenian side, and also the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Lavrov, alluded to that. So that July clashes happened very close to the vital trans-regional projects. Azerbaijan invested, not only Azerbaijan, but the Western oil companies, energy companies, invested billions of dollars in oil and gas projects. Also railroad, which Azerbaijan financed. I think that brought us to the situation, to the Second Karabakh War. But now we have to look at the future, and I agree that the wounds are very fresh on both sides. But we have to look beyond what the benefits this situation can bring to the people. Unfortunately, what I see in the writings in the Western expert community, it's too much about geopolitics, Turkey, Russia, I mean, the Iran, etc. But I think the key issue, key problem is the fate of the people of the South Caucasus. I'm speaking from the ground, and the people in Azerbaijan who got the land scorched, totally destroyed after 30 years occupation, of course, and they returned, they're rebuilding their life. But also, of course, the security situation and the domestic policy in Armenia, what will be the future. And it's time indeed to abandon this bankrupt policy of territorial claims, bankrupt policy of the mythology. I mean, there's few voices in Armenian diaspora emphasized that we need the new policy towards the reconciliation. And here comes the Turkey, Russia, because the agreement reached under the auspices of Russia, and Turkey is also playing a role. My fear that there is geopolitical rivalry, jealousy. We see the France who would like to have a role, and basically France should blame itself, because with one-sided policy towards Armenia and inspired by Armenian lobby in France, basically undermined the mediator role. But I believe the United States, we just recently discussed, we had the events on Trans-Adriatic pipelines, and we recalled how vital was the American support in 90s to the energy projects, Azerbaijani energy projects, because thanks to these projects, Azerbaijan indeed built its army, built its government, the economy, infrastructure. And here the people, practitioners, I mean, I'm referring to here we have 3 ambassadors, 2 ambassadors residing in Azerbaijan who also made input into that. I see quite unfortunate the moment with sanctions against Turkey, because Turkey as a NATO ally can have a role, and America, United States can indeed enforced by Turkish new role in the South Caucasus, can have a greater role in the region. Unfortunately, as I said, I see too much focus on geopolitics, on rivalry, rather than on opportunities which was created by the new situation. Thank you very much.
And thanks to you, Dr. Shafiev. You are right on time with some very, very timely remarks. We're going to turn to our next presenter, and that is Ambassador Morningstar. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Hoagland. We have a loud furnace on right underneath me. I hope it's not doesn't create any distraction. First of all, it's wonderful to be with all of you, to see old friends. I think the points that have already been made really have been excellent. Let me make a few points. One, with respect to the Biden administration. I don't know. I hope that the Biden administration will be more involved in Azerbaijan as well as in the whole of the Caucasus. What I can tell you, because I was involved, is that the president-elect was very concerned about Nagorno-Karabakh, issued several statements during the war. I was involved with feeding some information in, and so I know that there's a concern there. I do think one thing that could be a little different, and the Trump administration was hands-off. Bob, you mentioned democracy, governance, corruption issues. That may be of more interest to the Biden administration as it was in the Obama administration. And I think that those issues, yes, they need to be discussed, but they can be discussed in a constructive way. I tried to do that when I was in Azerbaijan. Sometimes some in Azerbaijan thought maybe I said too much, but I do think that that will be an issue that will have to be discussed. It should be in a constructive way. It should be in a compartmentalized way. We still need to maintain the importance of the energy relationship, as I think both prior speakers have mentioned. We need to continue our security relationship. I'll get to Nagorno-Karabakh in a moment. I do think Ambassador Sakuda is right that there are ups and downs as far as interest. Even during the Obama administration, when I was during the first term, when I was the energy envoy and Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State, she was very interested. She came to Baku. I was with her on that trip. She had a terrific meeting with President Aliyev. She liked President Aliyev very much and met with him in other places at different times. And I think there was a real interest. While I was ambassador, I think it was less so. I was always chagrined that the highest level person that came to Baku, outside of generals who were involved in, airlifts from Baku to Afghanistan and so forth, I don't think we had anybody higher than a deputy assistant secretary during my time in Baku. I think that was a mistake. I think Ambassador Sakuda is right that Trump had a sort of a hands-off approach, which in some ways made some issues easier. I know the governance issues he didn't pay any attention to, and generally didn't pay much attention. And hopefully in a constructive way, this new administration will pay more attention. And again, emphasizing that there are whole sets of issues that can be compartmentalized, whether it be issues relating to Nagorno-Karabakh, security issues, Iran issues, energy issues, and the like. It's interesting, when I got to Baku, I think the government in Baku thought all I was going to care about was energy issues because of my background. They didn't realize that the ambassador's job was more than that. I do think that the United States has to play a role in helping Azerbaijan maintain its balanced relationship. Azerbaijan with other countries. Azerbaijan has always said that given their geographical and strategic location, they had to get along with a lot of countries, Russia, Turkey, Iran, the United States. And I think we need to recognize that and help preserve a balance in the relationship, but a balance in the relationship in which the United States is part. Okay, I see that, but I do want to say something about Nagorno-Karabakh, and I'll try to do it in a minute or two. Ambassador Hoagland gave me a time's up. But just very briefly on Nagorno-Karabakh. One, I think it's an incredible achievement from an Azerbaijan standpoint that after all these years, it got back most of its occupied territories. I think time has been on Azerbaijan's side, both militarily and economically. The point that I would make is Russia holds the cards, I think, with respect to where we go from here. Russia basically saved Armenia from a total catastrophe. It didn't want to see total failure on the part of Armenia. The question is, how long will Russia protect Nagorno-Karabakh and protect the relationship between Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia? I don't see any, although I'd love to see it get resolved, and I believe it's obviously in the interest of all countries in the region, including Armenia, I don't see the issue getting resolved anytime soon. That there's no real incentive for Armenia at this point to agree to any kind of compromise that Azerbaijan would be willing to accept as long as it has Russia's protection in Nagorno-Karabakh. We'll see how that unfolds. I hope it can be more positive. The Minsk group played a role in managing the relationship, but not in achieving peace, as Ambassador Hoagland well knows. And I don't see the Minsk group playing a major role as long as Russia keeps playing its hand in Nagorno-Karabakh. And hopefully it won't extend its reach and create further problems in the region.
Okay, thank you so much, Ambassador. I especially appreciated the overview of the various U.S. administrations, and we'll talk more about that in our questions and answer, I think. And speaking of questions and answers, let me remind the audience, if you submit your questions in Q&A, we'll take time to look at them very closely and then pose them to our speakers. We're going to turn next to Dr. Luke Coffey from the Heritage Foundation here in Washington. Dr. Coffey, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Well, I want to start off, Ambassador Hoagland, by thanking you for granting me an honorary doctorate there. That's, unfortunately, I can't say that I am a doctor, at least yet, but it's always nice to, it does sound good, actually. Maybe after this this event, I'll start Googling PhD programs. But no, thank you, Ambassador Hoagland, for moderating this panel. I want to thank the organizers for putting this together today. It's difficult to speak at this part in the in a panel like this because you've already heard so many great contributions from so many knowledgeable and experienced people. And instead of jumping into the whole why Azerbaijan is important to the region, why U.S.-Azerbaijani relations are important debate, I'm just going to go straight to recommendations where I think that the next administration can build off some aspects of the current administration, where the next administration can build off or create new opportunities. So I'm just going to, I have a list of them here. I'm just going to sort of run through them and maybe it'll spark some sort of discussion or debate. The first one is actually echoing what Ambassador Morningstar said about the US just showing up to the region. It would be great to see a presidential visit, but I will settle for a cabinet level visit. Of course, as National Security Advisor, John Bolton visited Baku in 2018. But before that, the last cabinet level visit, since the last cabinet level visit in total was in 2012 with Secretary Hillary Clinton. So we're approaching almost a decade since we've had a cabinet level visit to Baku, and I think it's time that that changes. So just show up. And then the second recommendation, in addition to just showing up, is creating a more obvious and a greater diplomatic presence. And one of my proposals is to create or establish a consulate in Ganja. We know why Ganja is important for strategic reasons, for trade and economic reasons, but having a U.S. diplomatic presence in what is Azerbaijan's second largest city on the opposite side of the country, close to the newly liberated areas and close to the Georgian border, or relatively close to the Georgian border, I think would not only benefit America's perception inside Azerbaijan, but it would also help the U.S. Policymakers and U.S. diplomats get a better understanding of the situation on the ground in the region. So, so I think that we should consider opening up some sort of consulate in Ganja. When I put this on Twitter a few days ago, and a few Azeris responded by saying, hopefully it would speed up the visa approval process because it would be another facility to help do this. But I don't know the details of all that. There are other people on this panel who know that far better than I do. Thirdly, as we enter the next administration, I think the Central Asian strategy developed by the Trump administration should continue to stand. And one way that we could build off this strategy is by explicitly adding Azerbaijan to the policy formulation of implementing this strategy. And perhaps we should have a C5+2, not necessarily the whole event of the C5+1 meeting include Azerbaijan, but maybe after the C5+1 gathering, have a second session that's the C5+2 that brings Azerbaijan to that table. Because as Ambassador Sakuda already mentioned, you can't get to Central Asia. Well, I'm not sure who we've all said this, right? You can't get to Central Asia without first going through Azerbaijan, and it just makes sense to have Azerbaijan at that table at the C5+1 gathering. So maybe a C5+2. Fourth, as the 3 Cs initiative starts to mature and develop, perhaps in the medium term, we should consider proposals to create a 4 Cs initiative. For those who aren't familiar with it, the 3 Cs initiative is this program developed by, I think it's 12 countries of the European Union that border the Adriatic, Black Sea, or Baltic Sea. And there's the idea is to invest in infrastructure projects, energy projects, trade and commerce and transportation. So that way, oh, I just got the 1-minute warning. I better speed it up here. So that way the region can be better integrated. But you can't have a 3 Cs initiative without factoring in countries like Ukraine or Georgia, who are not in the 3 Cs initiative, but are Black Sea countries. And you can't really consider this economic space without factoring in the Caspian. So perhaps in the future, the Caspian could be the 4th C to this initiative. My 5th is the US should provide military assistance to all deserving partners in the region. And the decision to provide military assistance should be based on US national security interests and not on emotional appeals from certain lobbyist groups. So I think that the next administration should really think hard when it comes to issues like 907 and other military cooperation with Azerbaijan. If they deserve it and if it's in America's interest, then we should continue with it. And then sixthly, tied to the whole military cooperation, another area the US can cooperate with Azerbaijan is helping Azerbaijan with their wounded warriors, especially in the area of mental health. Many of us, I'm sure, have seen some of the videos that were floating around on social media that just gave us a glimpse of what the fighting was like in places like Shusha. And there's going to be a lot of young soldiers who are going to be mentally scarred and many more that are physically scarred. And the US, unfortunately, the US has almost 2 decades of experience with dealing with this. And there are other countries in NATO that do as well. So perhaps this is an area, and the US should also reach out to Armenia on this issue as well. This is an area that perhaps some trust and confidence can be built, and the US can contribute from our experiences on this matter. And finally, as Ambassador Sakuda said, we must build the peace. We must build peace, and the US must lead on this issue. We must find ways to bring Armenia and Azerbaijan together. We must demonstrate to them that any economic cooperation, energy cooperation, interconnectivity can only bring benefits, not only to the 2 countries, but also to the region. And perhaps one idea, it might sound crazy now, but in the future, perhaps not so much, is for the US to really push for that Transcaspian pipeline between Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan and create something that could be, we have TAP, we have TINAP, maybe we need a TINAT, which is the Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Nakhchivan, Turkey gas pipeline, and get Armenia fully on board, involved, integrated into some of the energy projects in the South Caucasus. I know we're not in that diplomatic or political space yet, but in the future we might be, and these projects take a long time to plan. So perhaps the US can lead the effort to build confidence and trust between the 2 countries by an energy or big infrastructure project. That's all I have. Sorry I ran over, Ambassador Hoagland.
Oh, that's perfectly fine. Dr. to-be Luke Coffey.
Okay.
You have raised an awful lot of good questions there that could take us for another few hours. But we do want to go on next to Dr. Svante Cornell. Dr. Cornell is someone who has followed this region as a lifetime career, one of the true US experts, and we're so glad that he could join us this morning. Svante, over to you.
Thank you very much, and I am very happy to be part of this event. And also I would like to send my greetings to my friends in Azerbaijan, both on the panel and among the attendees. It's very good to have this type of events where we, thanks to this pandemic, I should say, in spite of all the very unfortunate results, we have this advantage of now having hopefully interactions that are more that are not just Washington interactions. We have had a lot of Washington panels, as all of you will know. I think it's very nice to be able to have also communications where the region we are discussing is actually directly involved, and I welcome all the reactions from people in Azerbaijan. Now, I will try to be brief, and the question I really would like to raise is the following. On paper, the US and Azerbaijan should be strategic partners. I think on paper they are. In reality, things have unfortunately not worked out that way, and this has been a very troubled relationship. And I think there are a number of reasons for those. I can't go through all of them, but I think there are also reasons why this should change. I'm not sure it will. Just a very brief recap, a 30-second recap. I think we all remember the Clinton era, President Clinton's term as a time when the relationship was actually very good, with the building of the Baku-Ceyhan pipeline, and actually a strategic vision from the US government that had Central Asia and the Caucasus together. And I think that is losing that perspective is one of the problems we've had. The relationship worsened, I think, starting with the introduction of the slightly unrealistic freedom agenda during the Bush administration, which carried over into the Obama administration. There is much more continuity there than people often like to see. But it actually, I think, really got worse with the Turkish-Armenian protocols in the beginning of the Obama administration, which really poisoned, I think, the relationship for the 8 years of that President Obama was in power. I do know that a lot of people in the Obama administration at the staffer level harbored very strong feelings against Azerbaijan because of Azerbaijan's role in stopping that initiative, which I think was perfectly in accordance with the national interests of Azerbaijan. Now, therefore, on the US side, I think there are very clear things that Azerbaijanis will mention as being reasons for the problems with the relationship broadly, also a disengagement from the region that we saw in the current conflict and that continued, unfortunately, during the Trump administration. Obviously, there were issues on the Azerbaijani side. The negative development in the areas of human rights and democracy have been mentioned. But I think also Ambassador Morningstar would agree that the existence of high elements of the state authority in Azerbaijan that were openly anti-American and deliberately provocative to the relationship was an issue that created a lot of trouble. Fortunately, that's in the past, and I will return to this in a moment, and I think that is an opportunity. Now, had Azerbaijan been Kazakhstan, all of this might not have been so problematic because there wouldn't have been an ethnic lobby very purposefully working to undermine the interests of Azerbaijan in Washington. But Azerbaijan is not Kazakhstan. We could wish things were different, but they're not. This is a reality that we have to deal with. And unfortunately, this is the case particularly during the tenure of a democratic administration in the United States. And I think that's very important to note that the role of the Armenian diaspora is very much a different story within the Democrat Party compared to the Republican Party. And I think we should not kid ourselves that this is not going to be an issue in at least the 4 years that are coming. I do think there are elements of change, however. First is that I think there is a more realistic US approach to the issues of promotion of democracy. It might not be on the surface yet, but I think there was a realization following the Arab Spring that maybe regime change doesn't work. And maybe it is better to work with governments rather than against government in order to achieve change. I don't know how widespread this change is. I feel it, so to speak, in the air in the United States, but I don't know how deeply it has been internalized, that the way we have gone about these issues have not really been constructive. It's already been mentioned that the Trump administration took a hands-off approach. This was in a certain sense welcome in Azerbaijan, but I would say simply that the Trump administration didn't really do anything against Azerbaijan. It didn't really do anything for the relationship either, with I think the sole exception of Mr. Bolton's attempt to do so, which of course did not really lead to anything. The second point is that I think strategic competition in Eurasia is a big issue. It's been defined in the US defense strategy and national security strategy as the biggest challenge to US national interests. I don't see how, even if the Biden administration advances other issues, climate change and what have you, this is still going to be a reality. And I think this requires a returning to the strategic understanding that existed in the 1990s that connected Azerbaijan and the Caucasus with the reality, with the situation in Central Asia. I should mention that the new Silk Road strategy that the Obama administration promulgated happened in Mumbai, and it was purely north-south, did not initially include the South Caucasus. Similarly, the Trump administration created a wonderful Central Asia strategy, which I have all reasons to believe the Biden administration will continue on. There's really no reason why they shouldn't. And I think there are informal indications that there will be continuity, but there is still no connection to the Caucasus and to Azerbaijan, which of course is a big element of strategic myopia. The fourth element of change, I think, is the domestic reform agenda in Azerbaijan, which hasn't been mentioned yet. I think there is clearly a serious element of change in Azerbaijan's administration. It has especially affected, I think, let's put it this way, there is now a single voice, I think, in the Azerbaijani government. That was not always the case before. I think this is going to be very important, but the big challenge for Azerbaijan would really be to rebuild the image of the country that has been, unfortunately, turned to the worse, partly as a result of some Azerbaijani mistakes, and of course, by the role of the Armenian lobby and their friends among a lot of NGOs in the West. I think there are elements of change that are not necessarily positive. One is that the recent war showed that the West is really not that important in the South Caucasus. Turkey and Russia are. That might superficially be a conclusion. I don't know how far this is going to last, but I think that definitely in the short term, there is such a sentiment in Azerbaijan that we might not have to engage so strongly because it might not be that important for the primary issues that matter to us. I think when Azerbaijan turns towards reconstruction and development, that perception may have to change, because then this is going to be relations with international financial institutions and with Western powers is going to be an important issue. I think the biggest change which the war actually shows is that Azerbaijan is not a small state. Azerbaijan has become a mid-sized country which sets its own priorities, balances among the great powers, and is achieving results on the basis of the priorities that it set. It implements policy. You can see it in the conflict. You can see it also in the domestic politics of Azerbaijan, its foreign relations. And this is something I think the United States has to realize, that there are really three countries in this broader region, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan, that really are mid-sized powers that increasingly talk to each other and which act on their own and together. And I think that is an opportunity for the United States that has not been really acted upon. Now, going forward, I think there are just a few points that I'll conclude on. I think one issue I've already mentioned is the question of how the Armenian lobby in the United States will act and what influence it will have. Will it be supercharged, or will it be defeated, or a mixture of both? I think we have to remember that just thinking about what's good for Armenia as a state, it does not necessarily matter. That has never been the priority of the Armenian lobby in the United States. And I think we have to wait and see what the influence in the Biden administration will be. I think it could very well be dependent on the personalities appointed to a lot of positions. It may not be of a decisive influence. Now, in a way, I think to some extent, people in Azerbaijan might say that, well, maybe the best thing is for there not to be a lot of policy. Maybe the best thing is for the situation of the Trump administration to continue. I think on the superficial level, that is probably true. On the other hand, I think there are a lot of risks with a relationship that is not substantial and not based on a strategy. And I hope we will actually have a situation with a greater level of engagement, which will require come with some challenges for Azerbaijan, especially on the domestic politics front, but where the rewards, I think, are also could be very significant. I go back to the point that Dr. Coffey to be made about the connection with Central Asia. I think it's clear in the past several years that there is a growing geopolitical understanding in the United States for the role of Central Asia in this broader geopolitical competition in Eurasia. The role of the Caucasus in this is not widely understood. To the extent that Azerbaijan can link up with Central Asian states in ways such as those Luke described or other ways, I know there is an interest in Azerbaijan in doing this. But I think, frankly, for Azerbaijan to be seen in the context of Europe or Eastern Europe is not going to yield any results for Azerbaijan's interests in the United States. Being seen in the broader context of a Central Asian reality is something that actually does make sense geostrategically for Azerbaijan. And finally, I'll end on this point. I think it's very important to understand that most initiatives that will happen are not going to be the result of US policymakers. If you look, for example, at what Central Asians have achieved, the C5+1, for example, was a demand from Kazakhstan to the United States during the tenure of Secretary Kerry that was embraced by the US government and has been institutionalized. It was not an American idea initially, it was a Central Asian idea. I think we've all seen in the past few weeks how the high levels of the Uzbek government came to Washington in order to upgrade a strategic partnership, create realities that will last beyond this administration. I think these are examples of what must be done if Azerbaijan wants to achieve something. It means Azerbaijan will have to take the initiative, come with concrete suggestions, concrete proposals, including, by the way, perhaps, on seeking assistance on some technical issues relating to domestic reform and to reconstruction, engaging the United States on issues that have to do with with Azerbaijan's domestic politics and legal development and so on, might actually be the best way to take the initiative, even in those areas that are potentially challenging. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Svante. Enormous amount of good ideas there for future discussion as we move towards the questions. A lot of good questions have already come in. And rather than citing the names of the people who have submitted the questions, I've been making notes of the general topics because some of the questions are rather similar. I'm going to start with the very first question here that several people have raised, and it's of great interest to me too. And that is the future of the Minsk group. I know it's been reported that Moscow has said that the Minsk group will continue to play a role, but I wonder what kind of role would be the most useful for the Minsk group to play right now. I know it's been criticized sometimes harshly for working for 20 years without many steps forward, but I know from experience that both the capitals, Baku and Yerevan, were so dug in that it was very, very hard to find even the smallest compromise. What is the role for the Minsk group in the future, if any? Dr. Shafiev, would you please take that first, speaking from Baku?
Yeah, well, it looks like for now the role of Minsk group and maybe in the near future will be quite formal, and mostly I would say it's related to the role of France in that group. Because basically the agreement on November 9th was reached under the auspice of Russia with Turkish involvement, and we see that as a peacekeeping observers. So Russia's probably interest also to sideline the France and United States, but also Azerbaijan is really, I mean, I'm expressing what we have seen here, discussions. Really, the role of France was, as a mediator, was very non-constructive, one-sided with Armenian side, with Armenian lobby. So I don't think that Azerbaijan currently really would like to see the role of Minsk group. The second question, okay, we're speaking about Minsk group as a free countries. First of all, that format really 23 years existed. Madrid principles were abandoned. So what the future role? So I think probably before speaking about the function of these three countries, we have to come to the definition of what's the role, what will be the future status of Nagorno-Karabakh. Azerbaijan made clear that this question does not exist, though the Russians and today Putin also alluded that no, we need to resolve somehow that's in the future. But definitely Azerbaijan will continue to insist that the Azerbaijan territorial integrity, generally the completely different vision of the resolution of the conflict. So first comes what questions they will be engaged, and the second, the composition. So that's my answer.
Maybe I could just offer a provocative thought on the future of the Minsk group. Maybe the purpose should be to, and granted this will be difficult because of obvious reasons from Russia, but perhaps the purpose of the Minsk group should be to find a way to create the conditions on the ground where in 5 years' time, the Russian peacekeeping mission transitions into an international civilian monitoring mission. That could focus the Minsk group with a task. Frankly speaking, although Russia benefits from its peacekeeping presence in Nagorno-Karabakh, I'm not sure if right now the Kremlin really wanted to take on this additional challenge with everything else it has going on in Syria and in Libya, where it's had setbacks, in Ukraine, where there's no end to the situation, with uncertainty in Belarus, political uncertainty in Belarus and Kyrgyzstan, with the domestic problems of COVID, oil price, poor economic situation. To have this sprung on, this peacekeeping mission sprung on sort of out of the blue, while Russia will no doubt turn it to its benefit, they could probably live without it, at least right now. Now, in the future, this could change. But maybe the Minsk group should work towards transitioning this peacekeeping mission into a civilian mission, monitoring mission, along the lines that we see in Georgia with the European Union monitoring mission. And I know that's a very complex situation as well. It's not very straightforward, but maybe along those lines.
Maybe I can jump in, Dick. I think that Luke's comments are well taken. I mean, let's think about what the Minsk group has done over the last 26 years. To some extent, it's managed the conflict. It's kept hostilities until the last, several months. But although there have been hostilities to a relative minimum, but never really achieved much as far as progress towards actual peace. I think that there are two roles now that the U.S. could play and that the Minsk group could play. I think it's very optimistic that much will be accomplished, but I think what Luke suggested is would be a good effort, certainly by the United States, and trying to make sure Russia doesn't overreach. But the point still remains that I just don't see any basis for the conflict to be resolved anytime soon. That Russia, by staying involved, maintains leverage as peacekeepers, maintains its leverage over Armenia and keeps it under its thumb, and also can maintain some leverage with respect to Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan has gotten back, almost all of its territories, which is a good thing. So Baku is happy for now, and maybe it's okay that there be a status quo for the next several years. Yeah, there were minor hostilities apparently in the last week or two. The Russian peacekeepers did get involved in that, apparently, to stop that. So maybe it will be, in fact, a frozen situation where Azerbaijan has its territories back. Nagorno-Karabakh isn't settled, but sort of remains under the protection of Russian peacekeepers. And, maybe that's just the way it's going to be for a long period of time.
Okay, does anyone else have a comment on this issue? If not,
yeah, just a quick one,
yes,
if I may.
please.
I think the situation, it seems to me, is one of Nagorno-Karabakh turning into South Ossetia, which is basically a Russian military base with a very small local population that's entirely beholden for their security and for their economic, livelihood to the Russian military presence. We already see discussions about the handing out of Russian passports in Nagorno-Karabakh. All of this means that we're going to have a qualitatively different situation. I kind of jokingly say that Armenia lost the occupied territories to Azerbaijan, and both countries lost Nagorno-Karabakh to Russia. And the way Russia deals with this in the future, I think, is going to be a very significant factor determining how both countries relate to Russia, but also how outside powers like the United States will deal with the region. And I think this is an area for the United States. The Minsk group is an area to manage the situation, as was mentioned, to prevent Russian overreach. But the overreach has already started, and I think we'll see fait accompli on the ground on this issue very, very soon.
Yeah, I agree with all that.
Now, if I can just jump one quick statement on this too. The one thing to remember about the Minsk group is it's not just the three co-chairs. And I think that's, if we're looking for some sort of mechanism to keep other countries, particularly in Western Europe, engaged. And that includes in the economic reconstruction. The Minsk group may be, the broader Minsk group, which includes Germany, includes Scandinavians and others, may be a way of doing that. If you scrap it, rebuilding it or creating something new is not going to, be easy, and I would suggest not even going to be possible. So it may make sense to modify this, I think, along the lines that have been sketched out here, to get it to be the mechanism for looking forward, for really trying to deal with the sovereignty issues in the region and the peace building in the region. And I'm not sure the Russians will go along with it with the exact wording that Luke suggested, but I think this idea makes sense of using the Minsk group as the international basis for moving forward. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. There was an interesting question that came in early about the restoration of religious and cultural sites in the regained occupied territories and in Nagorno-Karabakh itself. I personally remember very well visiting Susha in 2017 and being inside the new Armenian cathedral there, which during the war, the most recent war, suffered some significant bomb damage. One thing about reconciliation after such a horrible conflict is that it takes reconciliation of peoples too, not just governments. So I'm curious, track 2 diplomacy, what would be the possibilities? What should we be looking for? And for Dr. Shafiev, I wonder if you could tell us if there is already any kind of thinking in Baku, in the government, about the restoration of cultural sites, religious sites, protection of sites that would help facilitate reconciliation moving into the future. Does anyone have anything on this?
Yeah, well, let me give a few comments, what's at least here perspective from Azerbaijan. First of all, I mean, there's so much propaganda around the fate of cultural sites, though it's clear that some of those sites were damaged during the war, but even more during 30 years occupation, Armenian occupation, almost 60 mosques were destroyed. Not much, yeah. I mean, if we're speaking about Western media, mostly they focus on churches, Armenian churches. For example, I can give example, the articles recently, 2 days ago, published by, or yesterday, Conversation, only about Armenian churches, only with one sentence about mosque. The same Guardian, the whole article about the Armenian church and only one sentence about mosques, though the damage done. But again, if we'll put this propaganda, the influence by lobby groups aside, the picture that overall, I just would like to remind, for centuries, both churches and mosques was there, and for the most part were there. And for the most part, I mean, we speak about territory of today's Azerbaijan, were ruled by by Turkey, because that was the more precise definition of the ethnic group until 1936. So that was the Turkic rulers, and they preserved all these churches that were functioning there. So definitely during the war, something was damaged, and I believe what the Azerbaijani government already declared, they inviting UNESCO, they coming, making the the field work. Okay, what is damaged, what should be restored? I mean, maybe 10% it's related to the churches, but 90% related to the mosques. Including you mentioned Shusha, but we have the mosque in Shusha, which was presented as a Persian. That's also another issue. But for track 2, it is indeed very interesting and very important, the channel. I say that in the government, we are discussing the issue of economic cooperation, the platforms, 3+3, 3+2, the voiced by President of Azerbaijan on 10th December, also the Erdogan. Maybe again, it's too premature, but I think we'll come to that point too, about 2 tracks, economic cooperation and the track 2 between people, between civil society. But I think it's a bit early. Armenia is going to introduce the ban on Turkish products. I don't think it's the constructive move. But maybe when things will settle, including in Armenia, we'll come to that point.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm especially glad that you mentioned that Azerbaijan has already brought or asked UNESCO to play a role in this. I think that's terribly important to have important, neutral, outside people involved in this kind of reconciliation. Does anyone else have anything on this topic, or shall I move to the next question? Anyone? If not, then what I'm going to move to next is a little bit more on the Transcaspian Pipeline. This is also a question that several people have raised. I know that this has been a sticking point for a very long time. And I also know, quite frankly, that the problem pretty much lies on the Turkmenistan side. But I am curious. I heard some very intriguing comments during our presentations earlier about the possibility of a new pipeline that would go from Azerbaijan through Armenia, through Nakhchivan into Turkey. Again, for reconciliation, that would be an amazing project. The US government needs to get behind this. So as several of you pointed out, in the Clinton administration, the US government formed a body within the State Department that that Ambassador Morningstar is very much aware of, that got the BTC, Baku, Tbilisi, Ceyhan, first pipeline actually built to bypass Russia. So let's talk a little bit more about the role of pipelines and the future of pipelines, including the Transcaspian Pipeline, but not only the Transcaspian. What is the role that the pipelines and hydroenergy could play in the development of both reconciliation and the development economic of the region?
Maybe I could start, Dick, given
yes,
all
please,
the
indeed.
experience that I've had. You know, several of you on this call have heard me say that the Transcaspian Pipeline would not happen during my lifetime. Now, the problem with that is that I'm 75 years old, so I'm getting worried. You know, and if it gets up and going, I'll know my time is short. But no, in all seriousness, I think for any number of reasons, a Transcaspian Pipeline now would be highly problematic. And without getting into all of the details, yeah, there are issues in Turkmenistan. I think there are issues with the Russians, who, although there was a settlement on boundary lines in the Caspian, that's always been a red line for Russia, and would use whatever political, if not military leverage, I think, to stop a Transcaspian Pipeline. But even more so, commercially, it doesn't make sense at this point. Given the pandemic, given the future role of gas, to build another major pipeline right now, I think from a commercial standpoint, just probably isn't in the cards. I think Azerbaijan has had the right approach towards that. Yeah, Azerbaijan says, sure, we'd be happy if there's a Transcaspian pipeline. We could get transit fees and so forth. On the other hand, I think from Azerbaijan's standpoint, it can explore and is exploring additional gas along its shores, can put in more capacity to existing pipelines if that capacity is needed, and I think that's the way to go. I think the idea of a pipeline that ultimately goes into Armenia and Nakhchivan and into Turkey is, in an abstract world, that would be great. I just don't think there's a need from a commercial standpoint right now. And I think for any number of reasons, I think it's highly unlikely, and not just because I hope to live a long time.
All right. Thank you so much, Ambassador. Anyone else on this? Yes, Luke, you've raised your hand.
If I may, of course, Ambassador Morningstar has forgotten more about this issue than I'll ever know. But I'll, for the sake of making this panel lively, I'll play the contrarian if I may, and offer perhaps a different point of view. Really, it's not a new pipeline that has to be built. I mean, Turkmenistan has the pipeline running to its shore right now, and then you have TANAP in the Southern Gas Corridor, which is online. So you're not talking about a very major project going from completely new pipeline running from Turkmenistan all the way to Europe. Most of it's already built, and perhaps with the focus on reducing carbon emissions and the green economy, natural gas will be more appealing to European countries, at least in the short term, until other green energies are more profitable or at least cost efficient. One of the reasons why the US keeps leading the world in reducing global emissions is because of our shale gas revolution. Gas burns cleaner. So this could be a selling point to Europe on why they would need this gas. And also from a security point of view to Europe, just having another source of gas that doesn't come from Russia has in itself a value. That's difficult to quantify, but nevertheless, it is a value. But the point about Russia not liking this, I completely get. Even with the Caspian Boundary Agreement, when was it? 2018, August of 2018, I think, around that time. I do believe Russia would cause problems, and this is why Efkan and I have written on this in the past together about proposing the first step being an interconnector. So just connecting two existing gas fields. This could serve as a proof of concept. It wouldn't be a fully blown pipeline, so it would be a lot cheaper and faster to construct and to build. As I said, be a proof of concept, and it would probably serve an interconnector would probably serve as perhaps come in just below the threshold of what would really upset Russia. So then over time, gas traveling from Turkmenistan to Azerbaijan through this smaller interconnector would become a fait accompli, and then maybe it could be upgraded to an actual fully fledged pipeline. But I know I'm always accused of being overly optimistic, and I agree I am at times, but I think I do think that there is some merit and some life to be had in this debate about a Transcaspian gas pipeline.
If I can just quickly respond, there's always some merit to that, and hey, again, in the abstract, I think it would be great. One problem we have that I spend most of my time, frankly, now on European energy security, is that and I don't agree with this European view, and it's not every European, but they don't want more gas. There are plenty of alternatives right now, frankly, to Russian gas through LNG, through projects like TANAP and so forth, and other sources of gas, and they're actually stopping any kind of financial help to new gas pipelines. They really don't want to see more gas. I just think it's a difficult situation now for all the reasons that I said. I wish it weren't the case, and I wish Europe had had a stronger view with respect to gas.
Okay, very good. I'm going to move to a few other questions here because inevitably time gets away from us. One question has come in. In fact, this was from Ambassador Susan Elliott, writing to us from New York City. She said that a number of people said that the U.S. needs to show up in the region. We need to play a bigger game in the region. And I personally fully agree with that. But there's also, along with that, the role of Azerbaijan in Washington. We know that the diaspora is extremely strong politically in Washington, as well as in Paris and in Moscow. But I'm curious, how could Azerbaijan do a positive full court press in Washington for the new Biden administration? Because, as has been pointed out, the Biden administration, a Democratic administration, is likely to revive a number of the policies of past Democratic administrations that sometimes were not helpful to Azerbaijan. So I'm curious, what would be some positive ways for Azerbaijan to make its voice better heard in the United States in the political arena? Are there any thoughts on that?
Probably, if you
Please.
allow short comments.
Certainly.
I actually also would like to highlight, we have many questions from Azerbaijani audience about your vision. Here I'm speaking about Americans, about the 907, the fate. Okay. I think we have discussed in Azerbaijan for many years how we should be more, how our voice should be heard in Washington, D.C. And whatever we're doing there, sometimes it's dubbed as a lobbying, as a caviar diplomacy, versus when it's coming to the Armenian lobby, it's more about public advocacy, etc. So we definitely, our diaspora is not that strong because it's just younger, smaller, and generally probably structurally it's different than Armenian diaspora. So definitely we have some limitations. But I believe the next year, especially after these all things with the war, I mean the hot phase is over, and hopefully yes. Indeed, we speaking about reforming our public relations activities, reforming the country. And here again, we're facing propaganda, but just let me give you one example. Doing business, World Bank rating. They in the spring they issued sort of the press release telling that Azerbaijan and some other governments they actually gave sort of the not accurate figures. But just yesterday, World Bank issued a report that actually they upgraded Azerbaijan's ranking as a result of the review for better place. So we from the 35 we moved to the 28. So definitely we see that the change is coming, the improvement is coming, and next year it will come. But again, with Armenians, for example, it's an Armenian diaspora. It's the the American citizens. With us, it will be again, if we're speaking about involvement of the government, that will be perceived as a sort of a bit negative, especially the now more restrictions put on the government funding and activities, foreign government activities. So it's not easy question to answer how we should really move forward, but I believe the Azerbaijan's image by the internal domestic reformation will be improved.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And I'm glad that before we go on to Ambassador Sakuda, let me just throw in here. Dr. Shafiev, I'm very glad you mentioned Section 907 of the US law. For those of you who are watching who are not familiar with that, many years ago, the US Congress passed a law banning assistance from the United States to Azerbaijan. But then realism kicked in, and Section 907 allows a waiver so that assistance can be delivered, as we do to many, 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 many other countries around the world, to Azerbaijan. So I suspect that will continue. But Ambassador Sakuda, I think you wanted to make a comment here, didn't you?
Yeah, if I could just make a couple comments. I'd like to sort of preface by saying when I was economic minister in Berlin, a complaint that the German government had was it didn't get enough attention in Washington. It is hard for, I think, every government in every country to get the attention they feel that they need. I would differ a little bit with Dr. Shafiev, because I think the question is, not necessarily trying to work through a diaspora, but work through the assets that are there. I think, first of all, one of the important things, and something which I tried to counsel my Azerbaijani counterparts on when I was ambassador, is get to Washington. Now, I realize in the age of COVID, life is a challenge as far as travel, but even the Zoom sessions, in some cases, they may even be easier. But to get to counterparts or get to people in the US government, it's not necessarily, I think sometimes there's a focus on trying to get to the Secretary of X or Y, but often it's important to get to the Assistant Secretary of X or Y because they're the ones who really know the issues. And don't worry so much about, equivalence, worry about effect, worry about consequences and getting the results. And some, it's very common in Washington for ministers and prime ministers, even presidents, to be talking to an assistant secretary or even a deputy assistant secretary, because they're the ones who really know the issues and will carry the issue forward to get it work done. Second area I would suggest is more economic diplomacy. That builds, in a sense, a group in the US who care. And Azerbaijan's done some interesting things in recent months. The agriculture minister, for example, has been to Illinois, been to Oklahoma. That carried out sort of, a good bit of information to people in the country who didn't necessarily know about Azerbaijan. Built up trade connections, built up technical connections. There are lots of things like that that can be done. It's going to require creativity. It's going to require effort. And I think it's going to also require understanding of how to deal with the United States. And it's not always a sort of direct counterpart thing. Yes, summit diplomacy is great. Top level meetings are important. Remember, President Aliyev and then Vice President Biden met and talked. But it's sort of, I would suggest trying to build up these other contacts, whether it's academic, whether it's economic, commercial, and also reaching out to states, maybe all ways to help do this. It's going to take time. It's going to take persistence. But as I said at the beginning, there are a lot of other governments who have the same exact problem. So maybe learning from each other. Thanks.
One last point on that too.
I would also.
I'm sorry. Let me just say quickly that there is change taking place in Azerbaijan, and as younger people, new generations are getting more involved in the government. Ambassador Suleimanov wrote what I thought was an excellent. He sent me a draft. I don't know if it was ever published, but a really good, positive op-ed as to what's happening in Azerbaijan. Yes, it's not perfect, but things are really, I think, going in the right direction. And I think somehow that has to be emphasized. Those kinds of changes have to be emphasized, and people need to understand that in Washington.
Okay, thank you very much. Our time is scooting along here very quickly. A number of good questions yet remain, but one that I want to get to is about the future role of Turkey in the region, not just so much in the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh, but across the South Caucasus and the Caspian region in general. And this question came specifically for Ambassador Morningstar and Ambassador Sakuda, but anyone who wants to make comments on the future role of Turkey in the region and how the powers should react to that, please feel free to say something. Anyone?
Yeah, I can say something about it. And there's something that we all ought to remember, that back in the days of Baku-Ceyhan and our policy towards pipelines out of the Caspian back in the 90s, one of the key parts of that policy was to help to preserve the independence of countries in the region, both in the Caucasus and Central Asia, and to get Turkey more involved in the region, given its cultural and historic relationships. And that was actually part of our policy. And although it hasn't been talked about as much, it's never been taken out of the policy. We've had 25 years of bipartisan policy. So I think it is important to encourage that, but it's also, we need to, we have a lot of issues with Turkey, and we need to work with them and try to make sure as much as we can that they're playing a constructive, positive role. But Turkey needs to have, I think, a major role in the region.
Anyone else? Yes.
I would second what Dick just said. Turkey is a major player. Turkey is a major regional actor in the Caucasus, in the Black Sea, in the Middle East. Historically, it's played a critical role at various points in European world history. I think right now, one of the problems has been trying to understand where Turkey is going. And I think that this, frankly, I think sometimes a conversation with Azerbaijanis might help the United States understand Turkey a little bit better, or be even sort of a medium, maybe even a channel to sort of help improve the relationship. I think one of the things, Dekmi is probably better able to speak on this than I am, the new administration is going to be looking at is how, to sort of, sort of put the relationship with Turkey back on a more constructive path. And that's going to be a key factor here. But I think, again, if we're talking serious about what we want to do in terms of the independence, the sovereignty, prosperity of Central Asia, in terms of avoiding unfortunate developments in terms of some of the projects financed by some other governments, Turkey is a key player. And Turkey's a key player in the Three Seas Initiative. We're going to need to work together. And this is all going to be part of how we move forward. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Our time is really slipping away here, but I'm going to use my prerogative as the moderator to make a short comment on something that's already been raised, and that's the future role of the C5+1 in US policy. For those unfamiliar with it, it's Central Asia +1. It's a regular dialogue that's been established for 2 administrations now, and it's already been expanded slightly to C5+1 plus Afghanistan. It's now, I fully agree with what I heard earlier, it's time to expand it further. It's time to expand it certainly to Azerbaijan, but also to the other countries in the Caucasus. It's that whole southern rim of the former Soviet Union that is playing an absolutely strategic and pivotal role in international security and international politics these days, with China, Russia, European Union, others, all looking to this region to make their mark. And the United States really needs to step up its game here. I have just one other question that came in here, and we've got a short time on this. Do you see any role for China and its Belt and Road Initiative in helping the region in any way? Anything someone wants to say about this, the BRI in China, and perhaps also along with that, the American Blue Dot Network, which is a policy that is to be parallel with the Belt and Road Initiative? Yes, Dr. Shafiev, please.
I will comment on BRI. I don't know much about Blue Dot. We're working with China. I mean, the president, I think, was in 2018 with the visit and $800 million contract was signed. In order to make this transportation project, we invest billions of dollars railroad to make it commercially viable. We need China. And when, people speaking about BRI, let's not forget that 20 years ago, it was the European Union initiative, Transcaspian, moving goods from Europe to China. So now it's coming this way. And the government of Azerbaijan is aware about some problems related to BRI, the debt trap, which happened with Tajikistan and things like that. So the financial assets of Azerbaijan is sufficient and not to get into that kind of the problem. So I believe whether anyone like it or not, but China is the trade partner, and American trade partner, one of the biggest. Not so for us, indeed, to make this investment, return of investment, we need China. So China will be playing a role, but of course, we know about the problem associated with BRI.
Okay, anyone else on that? Then rather than raise a whole new question, I think we are so close to our time limit that I'm going to turn it back over to Efkan Nifty at the Caspian Policy Center to wrap this all up.
Thank you, Mr. Hoagland. But I think before I finish, Bob wanted to say something on the BBM. You want to continue on that, Bob?
No, I was actually just very, very, very quickly.
Yeah, please, absolutely.
Agree with Dr. Shafiev has said in terms of it. I think this is part of that you have to get away. It was the BRI is a total concept of connection across Eurasia, which is something I think we're supporting. There are problems in some of the individual contracts and the financing and being clear on things, and that the debt trap and so forth. That then comes this other question of the Blue Dot Network, which is something that the United States, I think Australia, Japan sort of developed out of the G20 context. And what that's really trying to do is establish transparency and good commercial practice, not just good governance, good commercial practices in terms of major infrastructure projects. And so this is an effort which is getting really underway right now. USAID has been working on this. I know there are some companies in the region who are interested in joining in, but it's a way to sort of make sure that the countries, the companies get what they pay for in terms of major infrastructure projects, in realizing the needed trans-Eurasian transportation commercial linkages. With that, I'm not going to get in the way of closing us down. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We've had just an enormous number of very thoughtful, very well-informed comments this morning. Efkan, I'm going to turn it over to you to wrap this up for us and let us know where we're going next. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Hoagland, and thanks for kind moderation of this event. I'd like to thank all our speakers, including Ambassador Sakuda, Ambassador Morningstar, Dr. Svante Cornell, Dr. Lukofi, Dr. Fayed Shafiyev from Baku. And I'd like to thank Air Center team in Baku to working with us, with this Caspian Policy Center team here to put this event together. And also my team here at the Caspian Policy Center for their efforts to organize this event. This is perhaps one of the series of the events that we are starting with Air Center. Maybe down the road, we'll do other events, other topics as well. I'd like to thank our audience for tuning in and taking time to listen us. And we value their questions and comments. Perhaps we couldn't get all the questions, but please feel free to write us and share views, and we'll make sure to reach out to our speakers on the questions that you did not get answers for. Once again, thanks everyone for joining us, and I wish good evening to Baku colleagues and our audience in Washington. Have a great rest of the day, and happy holidays to everyone, whoever is celebrating, whatever they want. So happy New Year as well, and have a great one.